O'Donnell again, who was in Barcelona when the coup took place, came back, wrote the wonderful book Salud. Again, worked with the international brigaders and supported them.
Tásúla gom go winishib tanavas an alt agus an Tranona tá rowing. I want to thank first of all Eddie O'Neill for inviting me to speak. I think it's a great honour and privilege to be here with the Friends of the International Brigade, and particularly a great welcome to our friends from Catalonia who spoke so eloquently this morning. Thank you. Because of the time schedule, I'm going to do a synopsis of my very short speech, but I have to say that Eddie, or maybe it was his own suggestion of 5 minutes, is a bit better than I had before. A number of years ago, I was asked by the ladies, I live in Dundrum and Ballantyre in Dublin, and they were having the International Women's Day, which is next Thursday, and I got a letter from an African lady. She was from Kenya, and she was working with the Dún Laoghaire County Council. And obviously my name had been suggested to her, and she wrote, "Dear Donal, we would very much like you to speak at to our women, gathered group of women, on the International Women's Day. We would like you to make your speech short, interesting, and unforgettable. Yours sincerely, Samantha." So, anyway, let me just say that how I met Peadar first, and I've always have a habit of writing down what I'm going to say, because otherwise, if you don't have something, at least if I don't have something in front of me, I could waffle too long. So I may refer to it from time to time, but just let me tell you very briefly. In 1962, Peadar's book, There Will Be Another Day, was published, and it's been republished again by Red Sky in Scotland. And Peadar's story, There Will Be Another Day, and in it, there's a quotation in it that the Irish Independent, which back then, not that it would be any friend of his now, would be no friend of Peadar's, but instead of doing a review, the reviewer just took a paragraph out of the book to show the reader who would buy it what to expect. And Peadar was involved in the land annuity campaign. Now, the land annuities were, whenever we had the Land League of many years ago, at the beginning of the last century, and the British government had the Land Acts, they distributed the land to the small farmers in Ireland, but they had to pay an annuity in order to pay the landlords, the absentee landlords. So, it was a tremendously progressive move. But then you had the War of Independence, followed by the Civil War, and people didn't pay. And of course there were arrears. And while the annuity wasn't burdensome, certainly the arrears were very burdensome. But in any event, he started the campaign for the land annuities because our native government, because there was a secret clause in the treaty which forced the new government to continue to collect the arrears and to send the money to the British government. And of course, in order to get the money, the people couldn't pay. They started evictions and seizure of cattle. And Peadar very cleverly, if you like, Peadar was a great strategist, and he organised his campaign with a Colonel Moore, who would have nothing in common with Peadar's socialist or republican ideals, but he had a great love for the small farm countryside, and he organised the campaign which forced Fianna Fáil, who was then trying to get a foothold, to adopt the campaign against annuities. So De Valera said, if you elect us, which he was, his party, Fianna Fáil, was elected in 1932, if you elect us, we will do away with the land annuities. In fact, Paddy Hogan of Finney of Common accused De Valera of going into power on the crest of a wave created by Peadar O Donnell, and there's a lot of truth in that. But in any event, the quotation I want to give you is that Peadar was obviously received great opposition from many sources, including a Bishop Fogarty in Killaloe. He was the Catholic bishop who'd been very supportive of the fight for freedom. But when the new Free State government came, he was totally and called them communists and everything else. And he told the people to pay no attention to O'Donnell and to pay their rents. And Peadar went down to Nina, which was part in Tipperary, which was part of the Killaloe diocese. And Peadar said, he stood up on a public platform and he said, "I came closer to this question of the strange attitude of your bishop. I said there was an excuse for him, for it was in him to be on the bailiff's side. I had a letter from a man in his district that said that Dr. Fogarty, the bishop, that Dr. Fogarty's father, was known among his people as Tear him down Fogarty, as big a blackguard of a bailiff that was ever known in North Tipperary." And it said that no man should blame such a man's son for telling the people to pay their rent, but we had a right to tell him not to dress up as a bishop when he had in mind to speak as his father's son. Now, Peadar did say in that it is in that book, and he did say, I have no idea whether that was true or not, but I happened to be, that was 1962, and I read that, and I hadn't much money at the time, but I raced down and I bought the book and I spent all day reading it. And then I left my native Cork, as you detect from my accent. I see some puzzlement there. Now, I was born and reared in Oma in County Tyrone, but I eventually went to live in Cork, and always the joke is that the Cork people come back to Dublin to take up the good jobs. So anyway, I came to Dublin and I met Peadar. And I was in his house when Peadar got a call from the lawyers of Dr. Fogarty, his own lawyers, to say they'd got a complaint from the Fogarty's lawyers to complain about the book, and they wanted to take the book off the market. And Peadar met them in some large boardroom in Dublin, and you see, if I read that for you slowly, you see that he libelled the bishop's father. He called him the biggest blackguard of bailiff. He said nothing about the bishop except he was his son. So they're all around the table telling Peadar with their serious notes and that this has to be withdrawn. And Peadar said, "No, look at it." He said, "I've said nothing about the bishop." He said, "There, this libelous." He said, "It's his father." But they said, he's not his father. Then he said, he might have a case if he can produce evidence to show that he's the illegitimate son of Black John Fogarty. So you can imagine, because Peadar had that trait, I often say that people on the left, when you see them we see them in Dublin on television, and they're always very serious and nearly always complaining, and we miss sometimes the humour in people. I have to say now, Tommy McKerney is an exception to that. But in any event, when I met Peadar, I thought to myself, this is an amazing man. And I just read a couple of comments made about him, and I'm just conscious of the time here now. He used to say, how you perform on the stage is much more important than your exit. We were talking on that particular time about his potential funeral, and I was telling him what he should do, but he was telling me something else. And he performed like a maestro during the 20th century, touching all aspects of life in Ireland. And he founded The Bell, and The Bell magazine Sean O'Phelan became the first editor. And Peadar doesn't often get the credit for The Bell, but he did that, and he was turned in after Sean O'Phelan gave up editing. He edited, and it was, and I would say to Tony Davison, some of the articles in The Bell going back that time were extraordinarily supportive of the minority religion as it was in the Irish Republic. Peadar spoke out against the Ne Temere decree, for example, which was that if a Catholic was marrying a Protestant in the Catholic Church, that the Protestant had to sign a form to say that the children be reared as Catholic. And Peadar said this was asking somebody to admit that their own religion was second class, and you couldn't do that to people. Now, it eventually came to pass that has been done away with. But those are the kind of things in The Bell. And he was an extraordinarily good writer, and he wrote The Islanders, which was praised throughout the world, and by the New Yorker and all those magazines. And he also, The Gates Flew Open, which was the story about his time in prison and his escape. And also, he, in doing that, he also gave great support to young writers coming forward. So Peadar's legacy, and when Eddie asked me to speak the legacy of Peadar O Donnell, a very general term, and I thought to myself, well, one of his biggest legacies is his own books telling us, many of us, where we came from, because he had a great belief and love for the small farm countryside. And like Oliver Goldsmith's poem, ill fares the land to hasting ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Princes and lords may flourish or may fade, a breath can make them as a breath has made. But the bold peasantry, their country's pride, when once destroyed, can never be supplied. And he was always campaigning on behalf of the small farmer. And he had this great dream of a nexus between the small farmer and the industrial worker. Because when the small farmer left his land to go to work in Dublin or Cork or Belfast or to England, which more likely he did do, they got work in a factory and they joined a trade union. So the nexus was very clear. And Peadar always adopted that Marxian analysis of that there's a dominant tier in society. And the dominant tier in his society, and indeed in our society, is still that of the bankers and the industrialists and the very wealthy. But when Peadar was alive, the commentators used to pour scorn on this attitude. He was talking nonsense. And then we had the grand and awful crisis in 2008. And we ended up with the taxpayer and the ordinary people bailing out the banks and the unsecured bondholders who were just betting on the money. And at the same time, ordinary people were being evicted from their houses because they were in negative equity and couldn't afford to pay their rent. So there was an example of where all the laws and regulations, if you ever wanted a perfect example of Peadar's thesis, here it was for us all to see. And thanks be to heavens, there are many now organisations and groups, diverse I know they are, but it's still, to watch them now, there's so many people now campaigning on behalf of ordinary folk, the marginalised and the poor, and that's happening all the time. So I just want to make one other comment about Peadar's literature. He writes, this is something I actually know by heart, but I'm going to read it. This is away from the rough and tumble of poor old Termdown Fogarty, and talk about Crowvie, which was the place where the land annuity campaign started. And he said, and here's Peadar writing, and I think it's almost lyrical and poetic. It's a description of this town land. He said, Crowvie people will tell you that Columkill slept a night in their glen, and that the sheltering shadow of his hand has been over it still and will be forever. No man on the run was ever caught in that glen, not even wounded strangers with a great hunt on their heels in the year of the French. Day raid, dawn raid, night raid, always some ear caught the sound. If you ever took shelter in that glen, you might think if Columkill left the glen any gift, it was sharpened hearing beyond human range. Even animals had it. Dogs barked at less, cattle got to their feet in the byres for less, ducks, hens, geese. The grass couldn't fidget at night, but they heard it. A beautiful description of a place. And looking around here, I know some of you, if you weren't on the run, you should have been on the run. So his writing and I regard Peadar as a kind of a prophet, because he always warned people to fight their own corner. And as I said, he worked and dreamed of that different type, and he did it in every generation. He fought in the IRA, he fought against the sellout of the treaty. He then created the ill-fated Republican Congress when he tried to, when the Shankill Road workers marched in Bodenstown. I mean, to the grave of Wolfe Tone, as Tony Davis said. Thank you, I'm finishing. William has organised that. He said, I'll stop him. So I will bring it to an end in 2 minutes. But whenever they went to the Shankill, they came to Bodenstown, to Wolfe Tone, that great, and I don't know, was he a Protestant or was he a Presbyterian? Church of Ireland. Pardon? Church of Ireland. Church of Ireland. Thank you, Manus. Manus said earlier that when I said we were going to be caught for time, he said, I think you should just get up and say, Peadar sends his best regards and he'd love to be here. I don't know if he was joking or not, but anyway, but he brought the people from the Shankill Road March in Bodenstown, and unfortunately the tale there was that some of the people from some of the southern counties couldn't understand why these people were there, and that was, I think, the last year that they attended. But Peadar had this thing that he was always organising from the travelling people to the Tatey Hokers in Scotland, who came from Mayo and Donegal, to the unemployed in the 50s when he helped, was one of the leading lights of that. And I always say that where people, and particularly workers, as the old song has it, where workers organise, it is there you'll find Joe Hill, and it is there you'll find Peadar O Donnell as well. He was in the battle for the War of Independence, and he fought against the new Free State. But his amazing strategy and tactics in this book here that has been republished by Red Sky shows you how to organise a campaign, because he brought people with him who he knew wouldn't come the whole way, but they were able to go together quite a bit of the way. And I go back to Tommy and Tony's, what they're doing and what they're attempting to do. You need to involve people. Don't dismiss people because you don't think they'll join you. They may not stay with you for the total journey, but that's what Peadar did. And then in the 1960s, just to bring him up to date, Peadar was involved with a priest called Father McDyer, James McDyer, who started a cooperative in Glencolumbcille. And Peadar got Michael J. Costello, who was his enemy, because Michael J. Costello was a general in the Free State Army, and Peadar was on what we would have called the irregulars, the IRA. But Peadar had no trouble dealing with people. Forget about the past. He didn't keep in. If this could be practical and pragmatic. And Costello was head of the Éireann Foods, and he said to the farmers at a meeting like this, if you grow parsnips and carrots and potatoes, we'll buy them from you, and we're going to make soup. You know, these packets of soup you get, that was the start of that accelerated freeze drying. They came to Glencolumbcille, and people got, before there's ever such a thing as an intervention price, he would buy all their products and show them how to do it. Peadar was very much involved in that, and then he later became involved again, going back to Ill Fares the Land, to Hasty and Ills of Prey, and became the patron of the National Land League, of which I was involved with myself. And we had the Save the West campaign going on about the same time, trying to get the government to do something for the people. There was total neglect of the western counties for most of the years of our government, our own Irish government, and Peadar forced them through his campaigning, with other people, of course, involved as well. And then, whenever I met Peadar first, he said to me, and I saw a book quite like it there, sitting there at Fergus had, and he recommended I should read James Connollys' Labour in Irish History. And then he said, read The Reconquest of Ireland. And I read that. He then said to me, go down to the library and get Sidney Hook's book From Hegel to Marx. Now, I found that a bit of a challenge to read, but he was like a university to us. And there used to be 6 or 7 of us gathered in his house every Sunday morning, usually after Mass. And Lil was there, and Lil O'Donnell, it was the wife. And her name, she was also O'Donnell, with one N and one L, of the Mayo sept of the family. And she was even more fearless, one could use that description, than Peadar. She was an elegant lady, and her father, they were landowners, but had given their land to the decongested authority to divide among, as part of that distribution of land. And what I say about Peadar, just to finish, and I'll just read my last paragraph, and that is, I said, Peadar was a kind man, and he was a very wise man. He had a tremendous line in one-liners. He would say, it is important to make the right kind of enemies as it is to make the right kind of friends. And then a saying that has tremendous depth, and I use it 1,000 times, and I've practiced it, I found it in practice, and it is this, that a man can be right, or a woman can be right, and his neighbour's against him. But a man can't be wrong if his neighbours are for him. There's a tremendous amount of truth in that. You can fool the people outside, but the neighbours say, don't mind him, I know him well. You know, so Peadar had that tremendous ability to do that, and his kindness and generosity, and his integrity, his vision, and his sense of justice, and his affinity with the underprivileged are timeless qualities that rise above the twists and turns of history, while his writings provide us with a deep insight into where we have come from. He will live long in our memories and forever in mine. Thank you very much.